as Neil has described, this was an opportunity to bring an artist into a research context, and it was very much an exploration. And the opportunity to bring arts and science together is such a rich one, and that's really what we're going to be focusing on. So to start, Léonie, could you talk us through what it was like? We've seen, well, perhaps not the end point, maybe it's a middle point of your journey of sort of learning about mycology and engaging with it. But what was it like day one, beginning with this opportunity and a bit of a sort of a blank page to really kind of form it as you wanted? How was it? Where did you start?
I think I'm really grateful to that moment when I met with you and the directors in that first Zoom meeting, because a lot of the meetings have been digital because of the pandemic. And I remember you said to us in that meeting, these, as I in my mind called them, the big potatoes, which is the Kiswahili word for important people. So it breaks it down that these are the big potatoes. And there they were. And you immediately said, this is peer-to-peer. And I think that was very important. You were inviting this opportunity, which was peer-to-peer between artists and scientists, but also you said, who knows where this will go? So my original proposal was not something I had to stick to. That was very open, and all of the scientists were clear about that as well. This is an experiment. Let's see where this goes. So from that point, as I said just a minute ago, it was a series of encounters, and I saw myself a little bit like the end part of Ursula Le Guin's essay, The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, where she describes that there's still room in the bag of stars. And I imagined myself as a woman with a bag, and I was meeting each of these scientists one by one. And Lorna Barnes, who I mentioned earlier, who was working with MRC at the time, and said, you will feel overwhelmed and lots of it will go over your head. And so that's how it was. I'd be in these meetings and lots of it would literally go over my head, and occasionally a little star. This is really interesting. It's in my bag. And that's how it worked. And then at some point I had to empty the bag out and look at it. And a lot of people along the way guided me and helped me. And I met with Tim Lenton at one point, and he was incredibly helpful. I asked him a question about the film is a lot about survival and facing this idea of our state right now. And I remember asking Tim that question in an anxious way, well, what will we do now? And he said, he sort of had a smile. He said, a lot of artists get very worried about this question, but, worst case scenario, something else will come after us. And I take solace in that idea. And I was like, okay, that's really helpful, actually. But I'm still going to work in every ounce of my body to make sure we get to stay. But so each of these encounters was part of what built this film.
And from your collection of stars, I'm really interested in that process of going down various roads as an artist. And you sort of begin in a direction, feel your way, and then change direction and think, well, actually, no, this isn't feeling quite right. I'm going to follow something else. And so that process of getting to the point of deciding a film is the best fit for what I'm wanting to explore. How did you know when you kind of landed on the thing you wanted to follow?
I think film is very difficult, and I'm not experienced with film. And I think the first person who mentioned film was Al Brown. He kept saying to me, you ought to look at Alex Brand's work and you ought to think of a film. And I was just like, I don't want to hear that. It's going to be really hard. And then I went to go meet Matt Burrows, who works at the Phoenix, and I was telling him about the stories I was hearing, what I was learning from each of these scientists that I was meeting. And he said, and I was trying to put it into photography still at that time, photography with captions and stories, and Matt just said to me, sounds like a film to me. And I was like, oh, tell me that, I have to make a film. And so then I went back to my husband, who's much more experienced with film, and I said, I think I'm going to make a film. He's like, oh, you didn't have to involve me. Really trying to resist it, actually, every step of the way, but then finally resigned to, this is the way to capture these stars that were in this bag and put them together in a way where I myself could bring my own personal story into it as well, that my family is part of the film, and mixing the personal with the academic, with the scientific feels really important to me. So I felt that I'm proud of the decision to turn it into a film, and I'm grateful that the commission allowed me to choose any medium.
When I always assumed that it's a going towards rather than a fighting against, that there's that resistance, but sometimes the right answer, whether you like it or not, is going to be what it was. And just as well, you gave up that fight and went with it. The last question I want to ask you before asking Neil some questions is, I've found with projects like this, when you're working with academics and their knowledge of a subject, you get passionate about what they do. And I've been totally converted to fungi, and you can bore so many people with what you now know about fungi that you didn't know before, and the mind-blowing sort of facts and details that you put into it. So how has this project bled into your worldview? What's shifted?
I think quite soon I realised, in some respects, I felt enormous solace within this subject of realising my body is not as I understood it to be, and that I found myself at home within that idea. So I feel hugely grateful to a scientific and a biological way of breaking down the cult of the individual. I think I was really looking for that beyond post-humanistic humanism, inside humanities, kind of academic ways of thinking about it. Something about the biological, physical, bodily breakdown of the sense of individual really, yeah, shaped my artistic strength, I think, in my belief in my place in the world, and where we might go from this point. So mycological thinking and what fungi has been teaching me over these last months has also been really helping my world and my life. Yeah.
Thank you. And Neil, coming at it from the other perspective of running the Centre for Medical Mycology with your other directors, why an artist? Why kind of go down this road when no doubt life has lots of deadlines? Why have this open opportunity in that?
Yeah, well, first of all, you can see why. The product already speaks for itself, but questions approached from an entirely new angle are often extremely interesting, and in turn frame new questions. So I suppose people think those of us in the centre are quite reductionist. They start with ideas and hypotheses and bits of kit, and they work their way up to an understanding of an organism. But actually, looking at it from how does this subject make you feel is a very interesting alternative way, and it's probably more reflective of what many people actually do. And I would turn that also into a question for you, Léonie, because following your idea that you had this bag of stars, but we were all, everything is part of the stardust of life. It doesn't matter if it's a starfish or it's a giant oak tree or a baby in a perambulator. We all share the same molecules. But with fungi, let's be honest, a lot of people, especially medical mycology, is associated with a revulsion, maybe. So maybe a feeling, and a feeling that you might expect to have is one of distaste. Whereas I suppose for the people who study them, you get caught up in the aesthetic beauty of what you see. And I think your film also brings out the remarkable shapes and colours and forms and movements, choreography of fungi. So I wonder how that landed when you're saying, well, what feeling will I express? Will it be one which is, or wow?
I think I held on to what I originally said in my interview for the residency, when I think you asked me a question about somebody asked me a question about what were my aims with going into this story about fungi and the pathogenic pathways of fungi. And I said that I think we live in a society that is motivated by fear often, and I wouldn't want to contribute towards that. I'd want to make a piece of work which encountered darkness, which is real. I didn't say it in these ways, but just kind of expanding on my idea, but that had a feeling of a way through, which felt real. I mean, T.S. Eliot uses a line which is, human beings cannot bear very much reality. And I think there's a story here which feels like it's trying to bear reality, but not in a fearful way. In a way of, if we their reality, and we look at reality, and we look at darkness and things that are difficult, and we stay with the trouble, in the words of Donna Haraway, we have a chance to transform, we have a chance to metamorphosize. And fungi are incredible organisms to inspire us for that. As the film says, they are the magicians of shape-shifting, and we ourselves can also shape-shift within our minds and our psyches, so we can really be inspired by that.
Last question, and then I'll open out to the floor. When we were planning this conversation, we did talk about the sort of emotional, intellectual tension, and there is that sort of revulsion or avoidance or that kind of arrogance that you can kind of sidestep, the fact that we're all connected. And so, Neil, what are kind of some of the misconceptions, I guess, that you come up against that working in this way and being able to kind of zoom in, magnify, use scale to kind of change the topic into something that's sort of alien and beautiful? What sort of misconceptions do you sort of come up against, I suppose, and help people either think about the work that you do or the subject?
Well, probably lots of people in the audience as well have drawn or painted or sculpted some part of nature. But we all have done that dominantly, things which are bigger than what you can see in the eye. And that's about everything bigger than about 1/10 of a millimetre. And yet, the majority of organisms on the planet all are smaller than that. And I think what you've seen very beautifully in the film is that actually when you peel back that veil and look underneath, there's exquisite beauty in the form and the shapes that you see. And many of those are recapitulated in the macroscopic scale as well. And fungi are great because they bridge both. You can pick up a mushroom, which is a fungus's way of dropping its babies into the air and allowing spores to be dispersed, but actually under the ground it's like your film started, with the penetration of these tubular cells through the ground. So they have they have a foothold in our world that we can see, and one which is invisible. But I think artists, many of them have never had the chance, perhaps that you have, to explore the world where you need the microscope as an intermediary. And I think that's great. And when you do see it underneath, look what we've all been living through the last 2 years. It's been extremely inconvenient. It's been deadly. It's been some horrendous tragedies. But also, for a fungus, I would say that every single person in the audience will have probably used a fungal product of some type every day of their lives, not just an antibiotic, which would be an unusual thing, but you may have had bits of cheese, or I have a glass of wine this evening, or bread, or soy sauce, which we enjoyed in a meal beforehand. There are hundreds of products which all come from the fungal world, and they just enrich our world with a huge myriad of metabolites and products which I find extremely useful, and they're unexplored. So who knows what's still out there.
Thank you. I'm distracted by the wine and cheese. I'm going to bring myself back to the room. Any wave an arm if there's anything that you'd like to ask, John.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful collaboration, and I hesitate to say summarise, but it's so erudite. It's so full of great thinking. I was just wondering about the relationship between text and image, how the piece evolved, because the text is so tight and precise enough and responded so beautifully to the images. I wondered whether they co-evolved or whether one was before the other, or how did it work?
A co-evolution. In terms of that idea of a collaboration, obviously a lot of the images we're seeing in the film are from the scientists, mainly at MRC. It's their work, and it's beautiful. And in terms of that bag of stars, it didn't have to go very far. You just go in the door and it's like Taj Mahal. It's just what another world of incredible work going on in these places, and how many labs that have this type of imagery in it. So I guess the script I wrote, I sat down and wrote that only 2.5 weeks ago. I waited till the very end. With the bag was very full of all its images, all of my images, and it took Martin I'm still moving to go, it's really time to sit down. So it was very much in my mind, but in terms of just, and the script is also obviously compiled of a lot of the conversations I had with scientists, a lot of the books I've been reading, research. It has quotes in it, obviously, by Isabel Stengers and Bruno Latour. But yeah, so it was the end point. The script responded to having seen all of the images, but the last part of it was the edit, where the images and the script then get put together. And Martin, in terms of the editing, would say that the script is a very important structural skeleton to the work. And I would say, obviously, the third part is Meredith Monk's music. And that, for me, really holds the film together. So thank you to Meredith Monk for being a part of it as well.
Yeah, beautiful music.
Yeah.
So there's a question from Liz Wells online. Neil, my question to those of you at Exeter in the labs is, has the film made you think differently in any way? Has the film extended ways of thinking both in the lab, and how might this influence future research?
Well, we're quite a big centre, and I imagine there's maybe 100 different answers to that, and I imagine everyone would have something to say about how it changed their perceptions. Actually, we don't necessarily all see each other's work, and they've been put together in a completely new way. So I see connections there between some of our research done by different groups, which I hadn't really appreciated. There are things there which the flashing lights of you should see in the fungal cells are fantastic images, and it reminded me of some of the work that I was involved with many years ago, which showed that actually we've got a nervous system, and for me to move my hand requires an electrical signal to be sent from my brain to my arm and my fingers. But actually what you saw there was probably the origin of that, and it still exists in forest floors where fungi can communicate sometimes over hundreds of meters to say, food over here, not so good over there. And it reminded me of that sort of continuity back to the kind of tapestry of life that was your metaphor, which I really like. I think that really, to me, again, speaks to some of the work in the centre about the microbiome, which tells you that actually we think of ourselves from a very anthropomorphic view, but we're a collaboration. Our bodies are a collaboration with microbes that live on and in on us, and as you said, outnumber us in terms of genes. Even to move the arm above my head requires energy, and the energy comes from parts of our cells. The cells are ancient microbes which generate the energy which we then use. So this idea of life in balance, that we are all sharing the planet, I think comes through, and it reminds me about how we can explore that using fungal systems, which some of our group actually do, and that actually when life is out of balance, that can happen due to sterility rather than actually getting rid of an organism to do us better. Actually, sometimes getting rid of organisms makes us less well. So there's some great themes that are picked up in your 360-degree view of mycology from a different angle, which I can see. You could see in experimental terms. It's like half a dozen grants in that term.
But you talked previously about this idea of mechanistic thinking. How although we need that, we also need to get away from that. And I wondered if you could talk. You have talked about that when we've been talking, and you've really valued the idea of feeling, and the conversations we've had. Really, you sometimes remind me about that's what I'm doing. I'm bringing feeling to the work that you're doing and translating it through feeling. And I wondered if you could talk about that idea of mechanistic thinking, feeling, art and science.
Yeah, I guess when our group all started speaking to you, we both sort of looked over a wall and wondered how you were thinking about this. And perhaps it would be understandable to think that maybe the scientist was blinded to the aesthetics. They think mechanistically, they think reductionism, and maybe other way around, we wondered whether we would think there was anything in it from looking at it from the point of view of a feeling. But actually, we had a dinner beforehand, and I noticed you tested that question out on Gordon Brown, for example. We both said, no, actually, eventually, if you really understand a microbe like a fungus, you begin to understand things at the level of a feeling, and you design experiments also with your expectation of its behaviour. You start to know how it ticks, like you know the behaviour of an animal on the Serengeti. You know also at a microscopic level what makes it happy, what makes it unhappy, what stresses it. And so people study that. Tom Brown would study that as well. The fungi have got memories. They've got abilities to sense. They've got all the basic senses that we have as humans. And I think that is an important dynamic which I think you've captured it rather instinctively. And it doesn't matter to me that we're studying it mechanistically.
First, Sylvie, thank you for sharing this work with us. I mean, definitely it impacted me in so many ways. And I think, well, this is kind of like a bit of a question, and yeah, what would you guys recommend? Because, for example, me as a scientist, sometimes even if I was studying these things and knowing, for example, these things are climate change and the impact that we're having. In my case, for example, something like that, like transmitting the message through art or through something more visible, for me definitely made a change between just knowing it and believing it. So as a scientist, how can we start doing, well, like scientists from, the hard areas, if we were to call it like that, how can we start making or thinking about these stories in order to reach people? And I don't know if it's possible, because just as you guys did now with me, it actually felt, as you said, literally, this, it puts us in the right place in the universe, right? Sometimes we feel like we're the tip of the iceberg, and no, we're not. We're just the same part of a massive thing. So, how as scientists, that sometimes we struggle with storytelling, how can we start doing this work to literally express how can we actually be working towards a massive collaboration, everyone being good with all of us rather than just.
Could I jump on that whilst you're because my vantage point with the arts and culture team is my job is to bring people like this together, and I think, and there's something really interesting about the sort of shorthand of scientists on one side of the room, artists on the other, and it's such a kind of false split, and you can hear from the way Neil speaks about it, the kind of the visual, the curiosity, the excitement, and you can tell from the way Léonie speaks about it, the kind of rigor and discipline and research and time. And the more time you spend together, the more these sort of that blending happens. But I think the reason that it's interesting is that you have to be peering over the fence. There's something about being outside of your bubble, outside of people with the common assumptions, that people ask you questions that you forgot to ask yourself because they're new to it. And it's so stimulating to kind of open up new thinking. So I don't think anybody should want to feel like they have to take that whole thing on themselves. I think it's the magic of bringing those two things together and having opportunities to do that is where it really, really sparks. It's the difference, as well as having enough touch points for it. That's my 2 cents worth. How does it feel on your side?
I completely empathise with the way you put that question, and I think it is important to remember as a scientist, first to enjoy the awe of what you're doing, because the more that I think you work in a system, even ones that you've spent a lifetime working with, you realise mostly the profundity of your ignorance of that system. The more you peel back the onions against the next layer down, it still is, there's a miraculous void that you need to explore. It's one of the great joys of being a scientist, not many jobs you get to walk across, completely intellectually virgin snow. And it is an awesome experience to do that. Even though sometimes what you learn are tiny things, but they're new things, really new things. Nobody knew that before, even if it's a small step. That's a very exciting thing. And I think the other thing you said is, which I absolutely agree, it reminds you that we all share one fragile, wonderful home. And that's where climatologists, Tim, everybody else, who studies things at an organism or a molecular level or a level beyond the level of the planet Earth, are all humbled by realizing how fragile that is, how miraculous it is. And so I think it's a natural, to me, science is a very natural area for artists to be engaged because there's just so much excitement, discovery in that process, and so much emotion to understand. So I think it's a very natural collaboration that as scientists and an artist should explore ideas together and put their thoughts together, physically put them together, not just, actually do things like your project and get people together, tell them to think about it and work in it and generate outputs like this. Very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, collaboration, working together, multidisciplinary thinking, it's definitely the way forward on all levels. I realised how I was at points rendered a child in that, and so to realise there's so much I don't know in the world, and to realise that together in partnership with other people we can move a lot faster, so much faster. And if I want as an artist to create change and provoke change, then working hand in hand with science seems like a really productive way to do that.
So, hand here. I just want to check. If I'm not seeing you at the back, you might need to wave bigger. I'm not seeing anyone at the back, but so right. Question there and then question here.
I thought the film really picked up the hopeful aspect of fungi. Fungi can sometimes be a bit alarming or fearful, and I think if the film really engaged with the public in a very hopeful way, in a way that, for instance, Hollywood, the movie film like Girl with All the Gifts, which tends to focus on sort of the fearful aspect of fungi as sort of this, pandemic thing. How did you? What was your process in focusing on those hopeful elements? How would you recommend sort of demythologizing something like fungi, which are beautiful and beneficial to life, but it can easily be warped in public perception for, in that film probably it's for profit, but I'm really interested in that process of communicating that hopefulness.
Well, Meredith Monk, the musician, who I believe is one of the most meaningful and alive artists today. She talks about the art can break down walls, it heals, art can heal. And so I think, I don't know about the question of mythology, because I think I'm interested in enchanting, and I'm interested in fairy tale. I think there are aspects of horror in the film, small aspects of monstrosity and horror, which are really important to the film. So I think for me, I'm not trying to not do something, I'm trying to do something. I'm trying to remind myself that, as I say in the script, nature is the real book of life. Scientists are looking at nature, and through their eyes and their work, I can get closer to the place that I come from, the world that I come from. And so much for me about modernity is a problem of we've gone too far from the natural processes that are part of our world, and we can work with them. So for me, the film is just working with what I'm looking for, and I'm using fungi to go in that direction. I don't think I was trying to get away from a problem like some of the things you suggested. It wasn't it wasn't my way. My way was to. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Question on that?
I have a question for Léonie from Chris Forrest. How do you envision deepening your connection with fungi from here? And could you offer some inspiration for us about how we can all build our connection with fungi? Thank you.
So the collective that I'm in, Still Moving, I don't know. I never asked Gordon and the other scientists if they were triggered by me at one point saying, I really think what you need to do is make a sculpture. We need to see this in 3 dimensions. But all of a sudden they put out a sculpture commission, and so Still Moving. And at this time, collectives were allowed to apply. So we applied, and really fortunately we got that. So we actually get to continue our journey with fungi now, because we're building a permanent sculpture in Exeter about fungi and its relationship to the human immune system, and extraordinary commission. So that is very much continuing. And the second part of the question was, how can other people?
Obviously the sculpture.
I mean, obviously the sculpture, yeah. I mean, if you have not read it, I didn't mention Merlin Sheldrake. When I applied for this residency, his book was The Way In, and he is an artist whose words are at the beginning of the film. This is a brilliant way into fungi. Entangled Lives is his book.
So that commission is going to be on the Streatham campus, outside the building where the Centre for Medical Mycology is. And it was one of the challenges of the brief was to create a piece that would give some insight into the research that was happening behind the walls. And again, I think it's this role of the arts, that this incredible work is happening, and you walk past these buildings, have no idea, and to be able to kind of bring that outside the building and have that mix of beauty and horror all in one thing. So it will be completed and installed, we're going to call it spring, before July. And so I think everybody knows that. Needs to. Any more?
Can I just say about that too, that the British Mycological Society is a society which has got, part of it are scientists and part of them are people who are interested in fungi, and they organise fungal forays, and there are some locally. And there's an interface between the two. Some of them are artists who are interested in painting fungi, but they've been doing this for 150 years. And some of the records from some of the amateur mycologists from over that period have created some extraordinarily useful information which are helping us understand climate change, for example. They've noticed over that span of time that when mushrooms fruit in the season in autumn has been changing, and this has been mapped over this long period by people who just have an interest, and it's really making a substantial contribution to understanding the importance of things which are now very much in the news. So you can join organisations like that, and if you've got an interest, and be very much welcome into the fungal community.
Okay, lucky last, Gordon.
So Leonie, you know I love your movie, and I think you've done a fantastic job of representing our science for the public. You talked about a bag of stars, and you talked about looking over fences, but I thought perhaps you could just elaborate on a specific thing that you thought was really amazing in terms of the science or the discovery you found and visited. If there was one thing that stood out.
Maybe a bit of Gordon's research, for example.
Please don't say that.
Yeah, two things I can add to that. One, well, interestingly, I don't know if you remember this, Gordon, but you showed me a picture. You were the first person who showed me the macrophages and the phagocytes coming, so the immune system responders that come and they inside our body, and they come. You saw some of the footage of that. They come and take the fungal cells, they gobble it up. And you showed me a picture, but then when I asked, it was so extraordinary to me, the story you were telling me as you showed me the picture. In my mind, when I came back to you and asked you what that was, I said it was a film. I said, you showed me a film. He said, I never showed you a film. And so my mind made up this film from the story you told. And I guess that's also a part of how it became a film. That was quite a significant moment for me. But in terms of something really extraordinary of all the stories, and there were so many extraordinary stories, they're in the film. Mark with the story of the cell, the Robert Hooke, the cell, the beginning. This came from a conversation with Mark Ramsdale. I was blown away by that. This idea that we can return to the more timeless concerns of Earth and our being here. That those stories of the beginning of our time and fungi taking us back to the beginning. Duncan told the story to me about the stars, about zinc, and the things, Duncan Wilson, scientists, about how fungi are scavengers looking for the zinc and the magnesium, and this idea that these things came from the stars that exploded in our universe, that just blew my mind, that these things are in us and fungi are sharing us and they came from stars from a long time ago. Absolutely just incredible, just miraculous, made me feel so alive. So I could go on and on with that, but the Duncan story and Mark's story are really significant in that film for me, in the way that for me, modernity. We were mentioning this when we were talking earlier. There's a line in Yuval Harari's book Homo Deus where he says, you could sum up modernity in one sentence, that humans gave up meaning for power. And I think what we need is a revolution in meaning. We need to be digging up the meaning again, and build a system that's based on meaning. And slowly the power one will just diminish and the meaning will come back. And it's here, it's totally here.
That's a fantastic note to wrap up on. So, before you applaud, just know that you can see the film again as many times as you wish when it will be available on the MRC Centre for Medical Mycology website, and it's also going to be on the Still Moving website. And the recording of tonight that you want to share with all your friends will also be available at the CMM website as well. So please join me in thanking Neil and Léonie